Today we're continuing on with our Christmas series, Real Grace, where we're looking at Christmas classic movies and seeing how they illustrate some important messages of grace. This is part of our year-long focus on the biblical theme of grace, and we've looked into a lot of different components, looked at grace from a lot of different angles. But here in the month of December, we've been looking at taking a little lighter approach and seeing some of the important truths of grace, but as illustrated in classic Christmas movies. Have you ever wanted to or wondered what it would be like if you simply ceased to exist? If you just poof, we're gone? And maybe see how that would have impacted the people around you. Yeah, maybe your parents or your spouse or your children and maybe your best friend would notice you were gone, but really, would it make that much difference in your community, in your world? This is the question that our Christmas classic movie today seems to answer or wrestles with. The movie, It's a Wonderful Life, it helps to illustrate the important message or the important truth of grace, that grace compels us to make a gracious impact in others' lives. This movie tells the story of a man named George Bailey. And he grew up in a town named Bedford Falls, where he performed many good deeds and many acts of kindness. His father ran the local building and loan, and when his father had an unexpected death, he took over. And he continued to provide the citizens of his community that were in need with affordable housing. There were many obstacles along the way. He came into issue after issue, which he managed to overcome through his generosity, through sacrificing his own desires, his own plans, his own hopes and dreams. He took over the business instead of going traveling around the world. He used his money that he had set aside for college to pay for his brother to go to college instead. He used his honeymoon funds to keep the business in operating form and function. Time after time, George Bailey experienced or sacrificed in order to keep this business of his running, in order to continue to make an impact in his community. He turned down vacations, he turned down bribes, he turned down other job offers just so he could continue to be a blessing to those people in need in his community. And yet, despite all of that, on Christmas Eve, he found himself missing $8,000, and approximately $120,000 in today's money, needed to deposit in the bank to cover his business's expenses. Without that money, he was facing bankruptcy, scandal, and prison. And as his life started to spiral out of control, so it seemed, he ended up thinking that perhaps it would be better if he was just dead. And so he went to the bridge with those thoughts in mind.
What's the matter with you? Look where you're going.
I didn't have time to get some stylish underwear. Wife gave me this on my last birthday.
How did you happen to fall in?
I didn't fall in. I jumped in to save George.
You what? To save me?
Well, I did, didn't I? You didn't go through with it, did you?
Through with what?
Suicide.
Oh, it's against the law to commit suicide around here.
Yeah, it's against the law where I come from, too.
Oh, where do you come from?
Heaven? I had to act quickly. That's why I jumped in. I knew if I were drowning, you'd try to save me. You see, you did. And that's how I saved you.
Hey, what's with you? What'd you say just a minute ago? Why'd you want to save me?
That's what I was sent down for. I'm your guardian angel.
I wouldn't be a bit surprised.
Ridiculous of you to think of killing yourself for money. $8,000.
Yeah, now just things like that. Now, how do you know that?
I told you I'm your guardian angel. I know everything about you.
Well, you look about like the kind of an angel I'd get. Sort of a fallen angel, aren't you? What happened to your wings?
I haven't won my wings yet. That's why I'm an angel second class.
I don't know whether I like it very much being seen around with an angel without any wings.
Oh, I've got to earn them. And you'll help me, won't you?
Sure. How?
By letting me help you.
Only one way you can help me. You don't happen to have $8,000 on you, do
Oh,
you?
no, we don't use money in heaven.
Oh, yeah, that's right. I keep forgetting it. Comes in pretty handy down here, Bub.
Oh, tut.
I found it out a little late. I'm worth more dead than alive.
Now, look, you mustn't talk like that. I won't get my wings with that attitude. You just don't know all that you've done. If it hadn't been for you...
Yeah, if it hadn't been for me, everybody'd be a lot better off. My wife and my kids and my friends. Look, little fella, why you go off and haunt somebody else, will you?
No, now you don't understand. I've got my job.
Oh, shut up, will you?
Oh, this isn't going to be so easy. Yeah, so you still think killing yourself would make everyone feel happier, eh?
Oh, I don't know. I guess you're right. I suppose it'd been better if I'd never been born at all.
What'd you say?
I said I wish I'd never been born.
Oh, you mustn't say things like that. Wait a minute. That's an idea. What do you think? Yeah, that'll do it. All right. You've got your wish. You've never been born.
Clarence takes George on this alternate history tour of what it would be like in his community had he not been born. Would he just be missed a little bit? Had he made an impact at all? Had he made a huge impact? Well, what the rest of the story goes into. Now, I don't know if such an experience is interesting to you, but I think it might be a little interesting to see if I had never existed, what life would be like, to see the changes that might have occurred, if any changes did happen. But I don't know. I don't know what the impact would have been. The Bible tells a story of a person who also was in a bit of a situation in terms of the impact that she made in her community. The story doesn't include an angel that's giving a tour behind the scenes, but the story of Tabitha, or Dorcas as she's more well known, is a powerful story nonetheless. We read about this in the book of Acts, chapter 9, starting with verse 36. It says, "A woman who was a follower of Christ lived in the city of Joppa. Her name was Tabitha, or Dorcas. She did many good things and many acts of kindness." If you remember from one of our earlier series on grace in the Old Testament, that name of the city Joppa hopefully rings a bell. You can see the location on the map. It's there on the coast, just a little ways away from Jerusalem. Joppa was the city where Jonah was called by God to go to Nineveh, the Assyrian capital, to preach a message of grace to the Assyrians. And in fact, Joppa again plays a significant role in the next story of grace that's in the next chapter of the book of Acts. I don't know why, but this city has some kind of special connection with this theme of grace that we find in Scripture. But the story isn't about the city of Joppa. It's about a woman, Dorcas, who did many good things and many acts of kindness. She was a woman that went out of her way to do good things in her community, to bless others, to be a center of grace in the lives of other people that were in need. Because grace compels us to make a gracious impact in other people's lives. She was a follower of Christ. She knew the grace from God, and so she was a giver of that grace to other people in her community. She was compelled to enter into this cycle of receiving and then giving grace. This was what she did. She was a woman of grace. But we read the next verse. One day she became sick and died. After they had washed her body, they laid her in a room on the second floor. I don't know if she ever had thoughts like George Bailey did, that her existence wasn't worth all that much. But here in this moment, she passed away. And just like that, she was gone. Just like that, she no longer had a place in the community. Just like that, the rest of the people that had been recipients of her acts of goodness and kindness were left without this woman in their lives. As Clarence takes George back to town, George immediately begins to realize the impact that he truly had made in his community. He starts off by immediately seeing that his town was no longer named Bedford Falls, it was now named Pottersville, after the greedy banker, Mr. Potter, who, without George's generosity to keep him in check, had taken over the entire town. George encounters Mr. Gower, who was the town's pharmacist, but had become a homeless alcoholic because George had not been there to prevent him from giving some lethal medication. Then he goes to see Bailey's Park, which was an affordable housing development made possible by George's building and loan. But it was no longer there. Instead, there was a cemetery. And these were just a few of the negative things, the negative consequences, the negative feelings that his community experienced because of George's never being alive, never existing. And that's not to mention the fact that his family and friends no longer recognized him. Things in George's community were not looking too good without him there. And things in Dorcas's community were not looking good without her there. The story continues in Acts 9:38 and 39. It says, "The city of Lydda was near Joppa. The followers heard that Peter was at Lydda and sent 2 men to ask him to come at once. Peter went back with them. When he came, they took him to the room. All the women whose husbands had died were standing, crying. They were showing the clothes Dorcas had made while she was with them." Peter walks into this room, and he is greeted by these widows that were heartbroken, that were devastated at the loss of Dorcas. See, widows back then, without a husband, women were basically destitute. It was nearly impossible for them to provide for themselves. And so here were these women that didn't have a provider. Here were these women that relied upon the gracious acts of Dorcas to provide them with clothes. And they came to Peter and they were showing him these tangible expressions of grace. And they were telling Peter their broken hearts about how they didn't know how they would go on without Dorcas there in their community. See, Dorcas was compelled to make a gracious impact in the lives of others. She made a huge impact in her community. And George Bailey had realized he had made a huge impact in his community as well. And so as Clarence's alternate history journey came to an end, George returned to the bridge, wanting more than anything to come back to reality. Even though he knew his circumstances hadn't changed, even though he knew that he was still missing that $8,000, even though he knew he was still facing bankruptcy and scandal and prison, all he wanted to do was to go back to his community, to where people knew him, to where he had made an impact in the lives of others.
Well, hello, Mr. Bank Examiner. How?
Mr. Bailey, there's a deficit.
I know, $8,000.
George, I've got a little paper.
I'll bet it's a warrant for my arrest. Isn't it wonderful? I'm going to jail. Merry Christmas, reporters. Where's Mary? Mary! Oh, look at this wonderful old drafty house. Mary! 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 Have you seen my wife?
Merry Christmas, Daddy!
Kids! Hey! Oh. Kids, Janie told me. Let me look at you. Oh, I could eat you up. Where's your mother?
She went looking for you. With Uncle Billy. Daddy!
Suzu, my little ginger snap. How do you feel?
Fine. Not a smidge of temperature.
Not a smidge of... Hallelujah.
Hello? George, darling, where are you? George, darling, where are you? Oh, George, George.
George. Let me touch you. Are you real?
George.
You have no idea what's happened to me.
I have no idea what happened. Well, come on, George. Come on downstairs. Quick, we're on their way.
All right.
Come on in here now. Now you stand right over here by the tree. Right there. And don't move. Don't move. What's happening? Wow. Oh, I hear them coming now. George, it's a miracle. It's a miracle. What's happening? Who's going to come, Daddy? Daddy? Come in, Uncle Billy. Everybody in here.
George!
Is everything
Isn't it wonderful? So many friends. Mary did it, George. Mary did it. She told some people you were in trouble with it. They scattered all over town collecting money. Didn't ask any questions. Just said, George in trouble. Tell me.
What is this?
Like a spread like spirit.
Another run-on thing? Here, George. Merry Christmas.
Don't push. There we are. The line farms on the right. Come in, George. Now, don't Merry Christmas. Don't turn down this. Oh, Mr. Martinez. Here's Martinez. Step right up there. You all get up. I busted the jukebox, too. Major Ransom was charged with now. Here's some beautiful.
I wouldn't have a roof over my head if it wasn't for you, George.
Just a minute. Quiet, everybody. Quiet. Now get this. It's from London.
Oh.
Mr. Gower cabled you need cash. Stop. My office instructed to advance you up to $25,000. Stop. Hee-haw and Merry Christmas, Sam Wainwright.
flew all the way up here in a blizzard.
Harry, how about your banquet in New York?
Oh, I left right in the middle of it. As soon as I got Mary's telegram. Good idea, Ernie. A toast. To my big brother, George, the richest man in town.
George was the richest man in town, not because he had the most money, but because he had been the most helpful, because he had been the source of so much generosity, because he had been the source of so much grace. He realized the tremendous impact he had made in the lives of others in his town. He didn't ask for this money. He didn't earn their assistance. It was simply because he had been pulled into this cycle of grace, of giving grace and receiving grace. Likewise, Tabitha or Dorcas, as she was lying there in that upper room with no life in her lungs, she didn't know what was about to hit her. Acts chapter 9, verse 40 to 41 says, Peter made all of them leave, all of the widows in the upper room. He said, yes, I get it. I understand. She made a huge difference in your life. Yes, I see the clothes she made. I see the grace that she extended to you. I understand, but give us a moment. Then he got down on his knees and prayed. He turned to her body and said, Tabitha, get up. She opened her eyes and looked at Peter and sat up. He took her by the hand and lifted her up. Then he called in the faithful followers and the women whose husbands had died. He gave her to them, a living person. And just like that, her life had been restored. She had come back to reality. She had come back to this community that she had left unexpectedly. And it wasn't as if she had earned this. It wasn't as if she had been able to ask for this. Simply, she received this gracious gift of life from God. Can you imagine what that would have been like? To be one of the widows or one of the other people in the room, to know that someone who had made such a huge impact in your life was dead and now alive again, was gone from you and now has returned. Can you imagine what it would have been like to be Dorcas, to have your reality suspended and then come back into a room filled with the people that you had been helping and assisting and been pouring out grace upon in your life? Again, this was not an experience that Dorcas had because she had earned it, but it was because she had been pulled into this cycle of grace, of receiving grace and giving grace and receiving grace. Not for her own benefit, not for her own glory, but so that she could continue being this conduit of grace to her community, so that she could continue making an impact in the lives of widows and other people through her good deeds and acts of kindness. But it wasn't just that. The story concludes in verse 42, and it says, news of this went through all Joppa. Many people put their trust in the Lord. Because of Dorcas's or Tabitha's story of grace, because of her life of grace, because of the restoration of her life of grace, many people were drawn to the author of grace himself. Because this is what grace does. Grace compels us to make a gracious impact in the lives of other people. Grace calls us to enter into this cycle, to receive grace, to give grace, to receive grace, to continue to be a conduit of grace to others in the world that are in need. And isn't this what Christmas is all about? Isn't this what the spirit of Christmas is? It's about not being self-centered, but being other-centered. It's not worrying about what you're going to receive, but what you're going to get, or give, rather. It's not about hoarding on to gifts. It's about distributing. It's about not worrying about improving your own circumstances in life, but about helping others. This is what Christmas is. And this is what grace is. This morning, how many of you are looking, searching, hoping to have a wonderful life? The answer, the key is simple. Use your life to give grace to others. We might not have perfect lives filled with a lot of riches or power or fame. But the one thing we do have is the knowledge that Jesus Christ, the God of the universe, came as a baby to this earth 2,000 years ago. He was born in Bethlehem, and he lived amongst us. He taught amongst us, and he died for us so that we might receive the grace of God to have eternal life. And this is the greatest gift of all, because it sets us free. It sets us free from having to worry about ourselves and lets us worry about others. It sets us free from having anxiety about our own future and instead have an outward focus and to see what we can do to improve the future of other people. This is what grace does. It comes into our lives and it changes everything. And it is only when we stop being self-centered, it's only when we stop focusing on the grace, the benefits that grace brings to our own lives, it's when we stop hoarding on to grace and start distributing grace. It's only then that you and I can truly have a wonderful life.